we are going to be free, man. We are going to feel great. We are going to be confident, passionate Jews. We are not going to care what anti Semites think. We are not going to care what other people think. We are going to be unapologetically, respectfully, but unapologetically Jewish. So the entire generation of Yaakov and his 12 children, the 12 tribes, who had finally made it to Egypt to be with Yosef and to escape the famine that was taking place, that entire generation had finally died out. And at this point, Pharaoh enslaves the Jewish people. Many of these people had been actually born into slavery because the slavery lasted 210 years. This was not just a physical oppression, but this was a psychological and ideological oppression. They were slaves to labor in Egypt. They were slaves to Egyptian ideology, to the Egyptian culture, in fact, many of the Jewish people were actually steeped into idolatry. The Egyptians had served the Nile. That was their idolatry, especially since their sustenance came from the Nile River. That was their irrigation system. They worshipped their financial sustenance. In fact, Pharaoh instructed earlier, throw every baby boy into the Nile River. Steep them into that culture of it's all about the money, and that money comes from work, not from God. The Jewish people at this point are fully indoctrinated. And this is where Moshe comes into play. What Moshe represents is the ultimate clarity. Moshe was born and hidden by his mother, placed into a basket into the water. Pharaoh's daughter came, sees Moshe floating in the river in a basket, rescues him, pulls him out, and names him Moshe, which means to draw out. It's an Egyptian name. This was 3 months after his birth. Moshe was already given a name, a Jewish name, at birth. Moshe's name was Tuvia. I've always found it interesting that the Torah always references Moshe by his Egyptian given name rather than his birth name by his Jewish mother. Why are we referencing him by an Egyptian name? God addresses him as Moshe, not the name that his mother gave him at birth. He's receiving the Torah at Sinai, conversing with God face to face. God calls him Moshe, the name Pharaoh's daughter Batya gave him. To me, that's something that always did not sit well, until I saw 2 commentaries that gave really interesting insight. Pharaoh says that he's called Moshe to draw out from the water because Moshe had a calling in life to pull people out of water, to pull people out of difficult situations. That was his calling, that was his job, so he was always referred to as Moshe because he's there for the people to pull them out of difficult situations, to free them from slavery. The Alter Rebbe points out that water represents awareness of your true source. Fish are very aware of their source of life. They have to be in the water. They know that if they exit the water, they're not gonna live. They don't have a sense of full independence, but they have an awareness of where their life comes from. Moshe comes from the water. Moshe has that full awareness, that full clarity, that life centers around God. He is the life force of existence. And Moshe had this clarity, had this spiritual freedom. The Ibn Ezra asks an interesting question. Moshe is the redeemer and savior of the Jewish people, yet he did not grow up in the Jewish community. Moshe was not part of Jewish life. He grew up in the palace because Batya saved him. Pharaoh's daughter saved him. He grew up in Pharaoh's home. How is he the savior of the Jewish people? He never even grew up with the Jewish people. Obviously, he was committed and passionate about Judaism and felt like he was part of the Jewish people, but he didn't grow up there. So the Ibn Ezra explains that because he grew up in a palace, he grew up in a palace of freedom, he knew what freedom was like, he was able to desire that for others. In fact, when the Torah first introduces Moshe to us, the first thing that he does, that we know that he did, he's walking around empathizing with people's slavery. The Torah says, Vayetze el achav, he went to his brethren, he saw them as brothers. Vayar besivlotam, and he saw the burden, the pain that he had. Rashi says that he was empathizing with them. He was putting his eyes and heart to the pain that they were going through. The Chedush Rim says something else. What is besivlotam? Not their burden, but their tolerance. He was bothered by their tolerance. They were born into slavery, so they were tolerating it. It was okay. The ideology of Egypt, the ideology of worshiping something other than God was okay. Of worshiping oppression, of embracing oppression, as if it's just a normal part of life because you're born into it. They were tolerant of this, and Moshe was deeply bothered by this, and because of that, he was able to redeem the Jewish people because of the clarity of sight he had. The Zohar says that every single Jew has a Moshe within. Every Jew has a part within themselves that has this incredible clarity. And although we at times find ourselves enslaved, oppressed, whether physically we're just oppressed or bogged up by trying to pay bills, we're bogged up by ideology or philosophy that perhaps in our heart of hearts we don't agree with, but this is just what society demands from us. Social pressure. But there is a part of us, a Moshe within us, that has real clarity and understands that there's a right and there's a wrong, there's a truth, there's a bigger picture, there's a meaning and purpose in life beyond just paying bills and beyond the ideology of our local society. There is a Moshe within that has that clarity, that is there to draw us out from that water, that is there to help us and save us. And if we can access it, we are going to be free, man. We are going to feel great. We are going to be confident, passionate Jews. We are not going to care what anti Semites think. We are not going to care what other people think. We are going to be unapologetically, respectfully, but unapologetically Jewish. And it's going to be beautiful if we can access that Moshe. The Tanya says, chapter 42, that accessing this Moshe essentially means knowing God. That's what Moshe did. He got the Jewish people to know God. He inspired them to know God. And when we put in the effort to know God in a very deep and meaningful way, pray and connect and learn and study and understand His values and understand how God is really embracing us, we are going to have incredible clarity. But it takes work. Moses' job was to feed us faith. But in Tanya it says that the Hebrew word for faith, emunah, comes from the word oman, which means to train. It takes training. It takes work. It's challenging. But if we do it, we are going to be free. And boy, it's going to be worth it. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it, friends.